Well, let me start by saying that we did a couple of studies primarily to look at survivorship of spring generation monarchs in Texas, northeast Texas in particular. We have a study site up near Cooper Lake Wildlife Management Area, and we were very interested in knowing what role fire ants might play in the mortality of spring generation monarchs. So to that end, we conducted a pilot project in the spring of 2016, and then we did another study, a little bit more detailed study, in the spring of 2017. Basically, our method is to find plants that have monarch eggs on them. We visit those plants every day until we determine what the fate of those eggs is. We found out rather early on in our 2016 pilot study that when monarchs reach the third instart, at least on our host plants are Asclepias viridis, they start to emigrate off the plant. So it was very difficult for us to keep accurate records of mortality after they reach the third instar. So we restricted our analysis to egg through second instar up to the third instar. And in our 2016 study, we found that our survivorship, there we go. All right, so that's our study site. And still not getting the slide moving. There we go. So we monitored eggs to determine their fate. We stopped at the third instar. Oh, the other thing is we monitor fire ants. Go back. Fire ants by putting sticky traps around the host plants and also by measuring distance to nearest mound and mound density. I'm not going to be able to present all this data today, but here's our 2016 data, and what you can see is that our survivorship, which was about 15% up to the third instar, was really quite high compared to all the other studies that were reporting survivorship up to the third instar and using similar methodology. So that was actually good news. We did not find any correlation between how many fire ants we captured in sticky traps around the plants and survivorship. And the oddest thing of all was that when we looked at plants that survived, where the larvae survived to the third instar, and compared those to plants where the larvae did not survive to the third instar, the ones where the larvae survived were actually closer to fire ants than the ones that failed to survive, which was exactly the opposite of what we were expecting to find. So, in 2017, we decided to do some manipulations. We had two experimental treatments. One of these is where we suppressed fire ants, and we used hydromethanone, which is ant bait that's in cornmeal. And we broadcast that over a part of our study area. We also did individual mound treatments to try to suppress the populations of fire ants. And then we had another treatment, which we called enhanced fire ants. And what we did was glued mealworms onto the lower leaves of milkweed plants that had eggs on them. And as you can see, fire ants really love mealworms. They just love mealworms. And so we were able to actually enhance or draw fire ants onto these plants to see if it would affect their survivorship. And then, of course, we had control. So we collected data on 416 eggs and larvae on 260 host plants, thanks to having a lot of student help. And so this is the results of our fire ant treatments. And as you can see, in the traps adjacent to plants where we glued mealworms to the plants, we caught a lot of fire ants. And our suppression really did work. We were able to almost completely eliminate fire ants from part of our study area. And then you have controls, which are sort of in the middle. So what we would expect from all of this, if fire ants have a big impact on monarch survivorship, we should get a really big bar for survivorship here. We should get a really short bar down here for where we brought the fire ants on. And our control should be in the middle. So how do the bars really look? Well, as you can see, where we enhanced fire ants, we did get reduced survivorship. But what I think is probably most interesting about this graph are these two bars here. Our controls and where we suppress fire ants, there's really no difference here. So removing fire ants didn't really affect monarch survivorship. which is actually quite a surprise. And I suspect that what we're looking at here is the signature of some kind of compensatory effect in the ecological community. So if fire ants aren't going to eat the monarchs are going to die from something else, basically, is sort of the conclusion that I'm getting out of that. And we have a lot of arthropod data that we can look at to see what kind of compensatory effects might be occurring. To put all of this in context, this is our data from the spring and last spring. They're both very high. We're actually a little higher this year, but I don't think that that's going to be statistically significant. And again, we're doing much better than the previous studies by Calvert in Texas and Calvert back in 1996, Minnesota, Louisiana, and Texas. Even when we enhance fire ants, our survivorship is still pretty good. So, what does this mean? Well, this is all very preliminary. I have over 2,000 pages of data that I'm still having students enter into the computer. And we have a lot more arthropod data, but what the gist is that we're having really good survivorship on our study sites, and fire ants do not seem to have a direct negative impact from what we can find in our data on monarch survivorship, which I think might be good news. But again, this is very preliminary. And so with that, I just want to thank all of the students and all the people who helped this project work.